we have Milton here with us today, and it's super exciting to touch on this subject because it's something that can make a huge difference if you know how to do it right. And yeah, definitely, if you would like to network with anyone on the call, feel free to pop in your LinkedIn contact details. And yeah, I'll now hand over the time to Milton to introduce himself and to run the session. We also will touch on some pre-submitted questions if there's time towards the end of our Power 30-minute session. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Over to you, Milton.
Hi guys, thank you so much for taking your lunch to go through this webinar with me and allowing me to share some of my insights and perspectives with you. So today we'll be talking about how to tell a compelling brand story, but just a few things first. Right, so a few things that we're learning today. The first bit is quick maths, because I know that for some of you, we were trying to link together something intangible like a story with some tangible numbers. Next thing will be setting the stage on how the flow of the webinar is going to go about, and how you can use it, like for this webinar, as we go through the points, they're all going to be building upon each other. And I'd like you to start thinking and putting in for your context as well. Next, we'll be talking about the feeling your story, how feelings and emotions, positive or negative, can both be things and levers you can use to pull to push the story forward. Next, we'll be talking about story archetypes and you, where story archetypes are things that are very primordial, they're very intuitive and strong vehicles for you to push your stories forward as well as to relate with others. And then we will look at the kind of content and stories that you'll be creating and where the time and place come in as factors for how you can push for your stories a bit more effectively. And the last bit with the content, who, what, why, additional levers for you to consider, a TLDR where we're going to be summing it all up, and some Q&A at the end. All right. Okay. So, yep, I'm Milton from Bebop. We've been around for the last 10 years, and I think my experience with the clients we work with, as well as my professional experience, has been kind of varied. So, working with startups or conglomerates, we'll be able to see where, for startups, this is where you are at, and for conglomerates or big companies, this is where they would like to be, and to see sort of the joys and challenges across that spectrum. At the same time, for my working as a media production, so I've been behind the camera, doing shows, and then from there going to content strategy and creation. That allowed me to see things from just how it's like when you're trying to execute things to how it translates from something that happens either in a boardroom or a meeting like this, right? And with the startup and market accelerators, that gave me a perspective about the different markets and challenges. For example, with the K-Startup Grand Challenge, we had to move startups from around the world to set up shop in Korea. And for the Korea Tourism Startup Center, we actually had to move travel tech startups from Korea to make a home base in Singapore. And for the GIA Singapore Australia Market Accelerator, we had to move startups and businesses from Singapore that want to set shop in Australia. Through my experiences doing the marketing campaigns for them, as well as being the moderator for the K-Startup Grand Challenge, it gave me a lot of touch points to look at, to see what works and what doesn't work. All right. So let's head on to some quick maths. When it comes to stories, there's 3 stats I'd like to share with you for the purpose of this webinar. First off, right, as you know, 55% of consumers are more likely to remember a story than a list of facts, which is why whenever you're talking to children or sharing stuff through stories, telling them a list of things not to do and giving them a story from Aesop's fables seems to work better. And 68% of consumers say that brand stories influence their purchasing decisions. So for those of you that are on the fence, you should get on this. And now that since 65% of our conversations are made up of personal stories and gossip, I hope the stories and hot tea you'll be spilling today, you'll find useful. Right. Now, the content and material that I'll be sharing with you will serve as a foundation for how you tell your story. The reason with everyone being different personally and professionally, some of you might have been lifelong entrepreneurs, never having worked a job in your life. Some of you might have done different startups and be switching around. Some of you might have had a day job that you absolutely hated and said, I'm going to take the plunge. So your story is going to be a little bit different. And know that you can't win them all, but you can always put your best foot forward. For every one of your stories and where you come from, you have a core audience that will identify with you, but through the points that I'll be sharing, hopefully from the main story, you'll be able to extrapolate small bits to widen your net, right? To add it up, 100% of your story comes from you. It's been said over and over again, but always be authentic, always be genuine. Don't change a story or change certain things just so you can fit in. People can smell that a mile away. All right. Now, your feelings are valid, and how you approach a story and how your audience would see it, it does matter. So for every story, there's always your pain and pleasure points. You can find them through every narrative. So every dark cloud has a silver lining. And what we feel really depends on how we tell it. Certain stats, as you can see with the Doctor Who, is playing with Legos fun on the context. As a child, yes. As an adult, yes. But then there's going to be other questions and perspectives you can put in as well. So these are three sort of pain points I'm just looking at, and just to go through them with you quickly. Like sometimes when we're looking at the now, like we are spending way too much now, it feels that it comes from a negative place. But if it's put in context where what we spend right now will lead to better things, where you are building the business, you're investing in your tech, in your people, that sort of makes sense. As far as timelines go, sometimes people say this takes 4 full weeks. It seems like a long amount of time. However, in the context of the work you're doing, it's just in just 4 weeks, right? Next one that I get quite a lot with some of the clients we work with, MFA, which is multi-factor authentication, is such an inconvenience. But then MFA also keeps you safe online. Going through the additional scanning of your thumbprint, OTP, keeps your accounts and your finances safe. I think extra few seconds is good for that peace of mind. So when you talk about feelings in your stories, if you start off with a positive feeling, like it comes from a good place, you normally get good results. On the right, you see here, this is sort of like the emotion wheel, just as context, right? Why do I say that you usually get good results? Thing is, if there's already been too much that's been said, is crowded in that space, and you're saying the same thing, you might not get as much traction as you'd like. Next thing is that positive stories are easy to share. And one thing that we found out that surprise seems to be the supercharger or the catalyst, no matter the emotion. So adding an element of surprise can make the story more memorable. So if you put it together, you have a story that empowers and makes things better for your clients. At the same time, they have something to take away, like, okay, so this makes me feel better and I learned something from it. On the flip side, right, if you have a story that's coming from a place of pain, it's not always that bad. For example, like emotion can be strongly negative and still resonate. There might be things like right now with the SAG-AFTRA thing in Hollywood, and there's a lot of anger and rage about the unfairness of the way wages are being paid. That can be a strong point. However, we find that contrasting negative emotions with positive emotions for depth, that gives you a sort of a full spectrum. Just sort of like when you're going through a roller coaster, you're having a sigh of relief at the top just before you plunge down, and at the end of it, even though it was a wild ride, you do feel better for it. So as always, adding an element of surprise will make it better. So in this case, your client has a pain point, you're writing a story, you're able to solve it, and then there's a takeaway for them as well, right? Now, next off, story archetypes. These are universal for the way we feel and the way we experience things. And though they provide a foundation for stories that are both familiar and engaging, it's important because it's not something that you need to verbally iterate. It's something that you feel. And because of that, these are very strong vehicles for us to push certain narratives forward. And at the same time, As I go forward, there'll be some archetypes that I'll just leave on the screen for a while, just for you to form an idea before I go into it. All right, so as you know, Rocky, he's probably very instrumental for getting a lot of people to hit the boxing gyms in the 80s, as well as give rise to salmonella cases, thanks to all the drink of raw eggs, right? But for this story, we're looking at the archetype of the underdog, and how that applies to some of you. For some of you, you guys might be the new kid on the block that, you know, you have an idea to take on the big boys, and there's always the narrative of new blood disrupting the incumbents, or, you know, new technology or new ways of working disrupting certain industries. So in this case, we had this company called Circles Life. It's a telco in Singapore. There are actually three big telco giants in Singapore, and what they've done is they've more or less kept a price range for all the services. And this is during the 2016, 2018 era, right, where expensive data offerings like data was very, very expensive, and everyone kept it around the range. And these guys decided to come in to challenge the status quo. They launched 20 gigabytes for $20 back in 2018. And within 2 months, they spiked the sales up to 950%. So that's the good bit. So what you talked about earlier, there's always the good and bad of a story. The bad part about it is that even though they set a new bar as a data-centric telco, their services, their complaints where their services were unreliable. There were certain parts of Singapore as a small island that you couldn't get service. And this allowed other upstarts to really compete with a higher price by giving better service, because people realize that we don't really need 20 gigs. I might need less. I just need my data and plan to work when it's supposed to work. Next one. Be looking at rebirth. So for rebirth, and I think some of you can relate to this, it's where you're overcoming adversity or phoenix from the ashes. You know, this story archetype is very strong. I'm a big video game and comic book geek myself, so this story resonates very much with me. So Marvel, when they filed for bankruptcy in 1995, they've had a whole range of IPs, too many comics, and people were not buying as much of them. And that's after being in power since like the 30s. So they've had a very long runway, and all of a sudden their core business didn't work. They tried to go into movies by releasing Blade, right, in 1998. And the number here is interesting because Blade isn't a very popular character in the Marvel universe, but he still managed to make 670 million at the box office. And of course, we know Tobey Maguire with Spider-Man 1 and 2, 3 billion in, and Iron Man started the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as we all know, right? The flip side to this is that when you look at the story behind this, they didn't actually make all that much. For Blade, even though it made 7 million, they only got $25,000. And with Spider-Man 1 and 2 with 3 billion, with the deals they signed, they actually only made 62 million. And right now it seems to be a full circle where they've got where we had a bloat of comics and content. Now we have a bloat of Marvel content, and Phase 5 really kind of sucks. Next story archetype we have is the archetype of going through a quest. So for some of you, there's I spoke to some of you, and the solutions you've come by came upon a personal pain and annoyed you so much that you wanted to create a solution, and that solution resonates with a lot of people who have the same problem, and then they have a story of a brand or company or product. So this guy is, Mr. James Dyson, started an empire just because he was not satisfied with the performance of his vacuum cleaner. So as you know, if you look at the 5 years at 5,127 prototypes, this story has a similar vein with what we have with Edison and the light bulb, like how many prototypes they went through to invent the light bulb. And right now they've hit peak revenue in 2022 at 7.3 billion. The flip side of it is that the rising costs had hit their profits hard. So numbers look good on paper, but might not be as good for the business side. And since we're talking about stories, as you can see, I've had the joy and shock of learning that the hair dryers can cost upwards of $400. And as someone like that, I feel that just because of that, I'm a little bit richer. Right. The next archetype we have will be about transformation. So for transformation, we're looking at changing the course of the ship. And for a lot of times, we're looking at it as a pivot for business. And these stories of transformation they were actually very prevalent during a COVID when businesses had to go from offline to online. And this was a very important theme during that period. So with Netflix, they started as DVD rental, and then by going into streaming media, they beat up Blockbuster. And just because of that, I'm sure there's a lot of business case studies and articles about Netflix versus Blockbuster. And right now, they've got 238 million subscribers. There's a documentary called Netflix versus the World that explores this a little bit closely if you're interested in taking a look at it. The flip side of this is the password sharing price hike. It did anger many users. It was in the news cycle for a very long time. And the data-driven approach has led to many shows being canceled. So what they did was being streaming media embracing technology. Algorithms was part of the story as well, or part of their operations. What they'll do is they'll release a show, and depending on how many people watch it and how fast it's being binged, it gives them a rating of whether or not they should continue. And it becomes a vicious cycle. If you are investing time to watch a series and you know it's just going to prematurely end, you might not even start. So they are trying to solve this right now. Next bit. All right, time and place. You have a story, so think about your book, and there are chapters and things that sometimes you can take out different chapters to do different things. The three kinds of timing and content types we're looking at for your stories will be evergreen content. So stuff that's always relevant to your brand and relevant to your company. You can write it today, and 5 years down the line, it's still readable. Seasonal content for the second one is content where it's time and context sensitive to you and your industry. It could be based around events, and it's usually based around like a certain seasons. And news-jacking content, which is the shortest time frame, right? So this is a term coined by Scott, and it's a means of tagging a story what's trending heavily in the news cycle. So you can see we're going for something that's everlasting to something that's got a bit of a time frame and something that's pretty instant, right? So we're going to go through evergreen. So there's evergreen content that can be made for the general audience, right? For content like that, it's something that's easy to understand, accessible to anyone, and it's good for building awareness of your brand and your story across the board. And normally serves as a foundational gateway for people to learn more, to read more about your story, to read up more about what you have, or to understand the industry better. So in my case, as an example, if I want to find out what's the best kind of pet for me, there might be story pieces or content where it's more like a bunch of tips, and then listicles work very, very well. After I found out that I want a dog, I want 10 ways to train my dog. And then after that, I like a dog that's big, swole, and could cause me mortal harm if I step out of my way. So how do I make my pet swole? And this is sort of like an imaginary journey for someone that's looking through your evergreen content. And sometimes your evergreen content can be something that's meant for an industry-specific audience. We're looking at something that's more nuanced, caters to a smaller audience within your industry, and really helps validate your expertise. Because sometimes, like as you're writing stuff and you have a story, you get mentioned by other people in the same space, and they say, like, for example, Sylvia's an expert when it comes to networking and bringing people together. Talk to her, and this is what she's done. And for content like that, you probably have it in industry-specific publications, or they can be white papers that get very technical. Some notes about evergreen content. One thing I like about evergreen content is that everything's all online these days, and doing it well, it can help with your SEO, SEM. One of the traps that I try to share with our clients or people that we work with is sometimes like they say, oh, this is a piece of evergreen content. Can I peg it to this event? The events are temporary. The solution could be temporary or evergreen, but then the takeaway must always be evergreen. If the thread of the story goes through this bit and the takeaway works only in context of that, and there's no takeaway that can work independently, I wouldn't consider that evergreen, and I would approach it differently. For evergreen content, you can update and repost it. So sometimes when you go online and you check certain stories, it can be something that's been refreshed and updated for 2023. And as things go and change, it's always good to have that, because you already have the base content and you can just make it relevant and it bumps up to the top. And also, of course, evergreen content can be edited and repurposed. So there's going to be certain bits of your story or certain bits of a piece that you're writing or creating, and you might be able to take a small bit out. An example of this would be, for example, if you guys are familiar with Joe Rogan's podcast, he's got a long 2-hour podcast. He does small snippets, like maybe a conversation or two, or a topic which can last up to 30 minutes, and he cuts that out, and that links back to his main podcast. He's also got smaller bits, and it goes all the way from 30 minutes to even shorts or reels, which are like 30 seconds. Same thing, it all leads back to that one piece of content, but from there, you're able to expand your reach. Next up with seasonal content. Now, whenever you have things like, for example, Christmas, New Year's, Mother's and Father's Day specials, like in Christmas, sometimes you see for our friends on LinkedIn, or there's these takeaways like, this is what I learned this year. For New Year's, these are my resolutions. Mother's and Father's Day, like giving it back. Special dates for seasonal content. So, for example, we've got some of our clients and friends who get featured or are able to get a voice out a little bit easier during International Women's Week. And of course, Mental Health Awareness Month is also another seasonal date where things to do with work-life balance can resonate with people. Next up, we have industry events. So if there's a trade show, like Sylvia was mentioning that there's an event this week. For us in Singapore, we've got Switch. So that's one of those things that's happening. And you can have content around that about how you feel about it and what you learn. Of course, anything organized by Be Mighty, just, we can all write about it. Things to note for seasonal content. You should always plan ahead so you know which content topics and how your stories can be touched in order. Reason being, when you have a certain event, a certain conference, a certain speaking slot, these things are set in stone. So you can do things where you can build up towards, finish it off at the event, and then you can continue onwards. So think of them as your piloting or just at the helm of a ship, and you know where your ports or checkpoints are. So I like to do that. And always, like, even though it's seasonal, make it relevant to your brand and story. Don't latch onto something just because everyone's talking about this. I want to say something about it. Hey guys, I got nothing else to say, right? So quality seasonal content can also be repurposed. We've seen some of our clients have really nice Christmas, New Year specials, and it's just smaller updates, but it keeps itself relevant. All right. Last bit we're going through is news jacking. So news jacking, we're looking at something that's a really short, and it's sometimes it feels like it's reactionary, but I'd like you guys to look at this and approach this with some thought. It needs to be quick. So, for example, societal changes, if there's like the rise of same-sex marriages or certain policies and all that, this internet trends, the ice bucket challenge, sporting events, the World Cup, political events, where you have elections and Hollywood pop culture, where certain things become memes and you can weigh in on it. Do know that speed is key. And though we have the life of a news story here, and we say to newsjack over here, the stories and what you write for your takeaways can be a little bit different. By the time it goes to old news before it's done, you can have a retrospective. And it might seem really strange to have a retrospective on a trend, but it can be done if it's prevalent enough. For newsjacking, though speed is key, please tread with caution if it's a sensitive topic, stuff that's divisive. You have to be careful, and whatever stance you pick, you have to commit to it. And always check your content diligently. There's sometimes when people hop on a news item and they really tie it back to their brand or tie it back to themselves, and it's not right, or the news is fake. So that happens. So do check your content. Now, for additional levers, the who, what, and why. There's just three things I just want to leave you guys with as the last part of this webinar. So for the stories that we have, most of the times, especially we're doing business, we revolve around like the people who are part of the business, the product, which could be the service or the product as it is, and purpose, where it's very value driven. So as far as people go, first off, stories can be written about the individual who represents the brand. So for some of you who are solopreneurs, or you guys are the main guys on board, do know that you are your brand and people buy into you and what you do. So you're carrying on your shoulders at this point of time if this is the angle we're going. Stuff about how you're founder, visionary, entrepreneur. I'm sure you've seen tons of this, and examples, Elon Musk and Gary Vaynerchuk. So that's one angle if you're looking at the people angle as an individual. Some story angles can be done through a duo, and this actually works really well if both of you have a dynamic and a call to the business. As I said earlier on, you're not for everybody, and you gotta do you. This helps you spread your net a little bit wider, because you might have a service or a company, but people relate more to you than your partner, or vice versa. So some of the story angles we have will be like the complementary duo, and we see that a lot. Like the visionary meets the builder together to create something amazing. Or another one I like to call the united duo, where both of you are the same mind. So two people on the same journey, slight personality quirks and differences. In this case, if you look at Steve Jobs and Wozniak, that's where we've had stories of the visionary with Jobs and Wozniak as the builder. And of course, Ben and Jerry's, you can't have one without the other. If looking at content around people and we expand from a single duo to a team, stories around this normally work towards a bigger picture. Everyone's working towards a united goal, and we get to look at what goes through on different levels. So it's really like a peek under the hood, take a look at our day-to-days. This is what we do when we plan, and this is how we execute. There's stories like that. Always, synergy between founder and team, to humanize things and to just let people know how do you guys get things done. And though we have things from Elon Musk and his team, Steve Jobs and his team, and not all of it is good, when you do get a chance to start, you can start documenting, like just even your processes, sharing your processes and how you do things. That itself can be a good story, because there's going to be other people in your same stage that would need some advice. Next, content. When we have a story and it becomes the product or the service becomes a generic term. For example, have you tried Googling it, or you've got a bit of a cut, just put a band-aid on it. There's some products that almost become verbs, right? And they center around what it does, and it sells itself. So a lot of the stories for that would be, for the product, what it does for you, reviews and testimonials from clients. That'd be great. And the examples here, you guys are familiar with. And one day, who knows, maybe like things like I hope that for your companies and your stories that you guys will one day become verbs as well. That'd be great. Okay, so purpose is stories that are driven by certain values. We see that a lot with I've seen certain clean tech or sustainability tech companies and solutions where cleaning and just being carbon zero or saving the world. That's the purpose of it. An example I want to share with you, right? Like would be Nordstrom. So Nordstrom, they have the famous tire story, which you can read about it online, where in 1975, someone had wanted to change some tires. They rolled up, but Nordstrom had actually bought over the place. And though they sold apparel and they sold clothes, they still honored it because the guy said that I was told that I could come in and get my tires swapped out. So he gave the guy sort of a refund for the tires. And that story has been synonymous with Nordstrom's dedication and commitment to their customer, to the point that they even have tires that are hung at their stores or in their break room just as a reminder. So that's how powerful a purpose-driven story can be. Right. Let's go on to the TLDR before we wrap this up. So do know that stories, though they have a tangible effect on your brand, you need to be able to angle and position right. Know that emotions flavor the story for yourself and the audience. Like, how do you feel? How they feel? And it's always, how do you want them to feel at the end, right? And things like the stronger you feel about something, you'll be able to project that. Next thing, archetypes are useful and help bring everyone together. Whenever you have a story or a legend that you want to build up, do know that these are important vehicles. And I know there's a lot of archetypes out there, but just identify yourself in some of them and your audience in some of them. Next thing, evergreen, seasonal, or newsjacking, you must always have a context to your content. So certain things will be good for a short time. Certain things will be good no matter when you read them. You have to keep the timeline in mind of how relevant any story that you're creating is, and where it fits in the bigger scheme of things. Who, what, why? So you can always lead with one, and it will help the rest take shape. Some of our clients that we work with, they have a dream, they have a quest. So there's a purpose that they want to do, or something they want to fulfill. So they have a strong why, and the why resonates with people. They know who's behind it, and eventually they say, this is what we're going to build. So these are just the levers that we can use to work things up. Now, that's it for the webinar. So thank you for your time. I think, do we have some time for Q&A?
Awesome. Thanks, Milton. And if you could stay on just for 5 minutes, and for anyone
Easy.
who jump off, feel free to drop off. Just want to say, okay. So yeah, thanks for this power session. As you went through the session, I realized you were answering all the questions that were submitted. Would be keen to hear your thoughts on so one of the questions that was submitted was about how do you make your storytelling not feel like a marketing spill, so it comes across as authentic, it's creating the emotions that you want, but at the same time it's not coming as just like a hard sell marketing spill.
I think for the bits when I went through the who, what, why, focusing on the why and the who, that comes across a bit more genuine, because I know there's certain companies or certain stories where it's very product centric, and if it's very product centric and you're trying to sell something all the time, it does feel very markety. And another thing that I find that's especially useful when we create a long piece, being able to take out small pieces and start conversations and discussions about them. You want engagement. And look, there's a lot of times we have calls with friends, clients, or just people just want to have a chat. They have a question, something stuck in their head with a story idea, or like, look, I want to do this. And we're more than happy to get on the call, says, look, try this, give it a shot, let it work. Always be willing to share and help. I find that's very, very useful. One thing that I get reminded from by my partner Peter, which I believe is on the call, is that there's a lot of things that we have in our expertise that we take for granted, right? And it's something that's easy to do. A lot of times the adjustments from being too markety to being more personable, it's not a big shift, it's just small little shifts. So not talking about your product so much, just talk about like how did you come upon the idea of your product or service? Like a bit about yourself, you know, because at the end of the day, like if you're looking at the people angle and looking as an individual, people want to relate to you. You can always drive it back, but I find like one thing that's very important is to be able to have a story and find ways to let other people participate in it as well.
Awesome. And one last question. So it's not quite related to today's session, but it's more like the next steps. There was a question about, now that you have your brand story, how do you actually distribute it for more people to know? What are some ways to distribute your brand story?
Oh man, so with the brand story, like stuff on, I mean, on LinkedIn, on your socials, there's different channels that do different things easily. So sometimes I've seen people have a brand story or something that's just as simple like, oh, this is what I'm going to do, go through my day. And since it's visual, video, it's on Insta. Something that's on LinkedIn, it can be a piece that you've written or an extrapolation from a blog. And generally for a website blog where you have the most control, you can really go ham on it. So if I can look at it as a a pyramid or funnel, so to speak, right? Anything that's short form, you want short form bits that go out really quickly on your different social media channels. For your LinkedIn, you can go in a little bit deeper. For stuff that you just want to just like, this is the full unabridged version, you can get it done on your blog. And sometimes the writing process is a little bit different. Sometimes people start from small and say, look, I might have something big that's going on, and they build up from small to big. Some people, they have an idea like, this is a whole bit that I want to say. So it goes from the blog, and then it's good for them to cut it up to put it for the other socials. And there's no right or wrong ways. Our brains just work very differently. Some people go big to small, some people go small to big.
Very interesting. Awesome. Thanks so much, Milton. I really appreciate this. And yeah, we're getting all these like thank yous from everyone as well. So yeah, so we'll just wrap up the session here. And everyone, please connect with Milton on LinkedIn. I'll reshare his link again here. And awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And we can't wait to see how you apply today's tips.
If you guys got any questions, just hit me up on LinkedIn, man. I'm always more than happy to have a chat. And like what gets me out of bed, and I'm very fortunate to be able to do what I do or do what we do. Just good stories just really light up the soul.
Awesome. Yeah, we all need that to help. Not just Monday, but every day of the week. Yeah.
Every day of the week, it does help.
Every day. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the Monday and the week. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Glad you guys found this helpful. See y'all soon.
See ya.